Hello and welcome to another episode of Purvis Versus. My name is Eric Purvis. I'm a massage therapist, course creator, continuing education provider, curriculum advisor, and advocate for evidence-based massage therapy. In this episode, we welcome Pam Fitch, who is a well-known RMT, author, and educator from Ontario. Pam's main area of interest is healthcare ethics. In this episode, we discuss the importance of holding a safe space free of judgment and how valuable it is to listen and validate people's experiences. We explore evidence-based practice and informed consent and discuss what that looks like in the treatment room for RMTs. And there's two great quotes from this episode. One, we treat people, we don't treat conditions. And number two, don't be creepy. If you enjoy this episode, please rate it and share it on your favorite social media platforms. You can also support my podcast by making a donation by visiting buymeacoffee.com/helloob. And Purvis Versus can also be found on YouTube, so please check us out there and subscribe. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Purvis Versus. Today we are here to welcome Pam Fitch from Ottawa, Ontario. I'm really excited to have her here today, and this is going to be, I think, such a fantastic conversation because we're going to talk about ethics. That's going to be our focus, and healthcare ethics, and how this applies to our wonderful profession of massage therapy. So welcome, Pam. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's so happy to be here.
Yeah, it'd be great today. So tell us the audience a little bit more about you. You know, who are you and where are you and what do you do and why is the things that you do so important for RMTs to know?
Well, I have been a massage therapist for decades. Like many of your listeners may not have been born when I became a massage therapist a long time ago. And in my experience, and I don't think things have changed very much since then, we were trained very well in manual therapy techniques. But the whole piece around talking to the individuals that we saw as clients was missing somewhat in my training. I had some things that I was taught. We had a class called Emotional First Aid, which was a few hours, and we had a few communication conversations. But fundamentally, in my experience, massage therapy is taught in silos. So you get knowledge about the jurisprudence, what are the laws and the regulations for whatever area that you're in, and then maybe there's a little bit about communication, and maybe there's a class about informed consent, but nobody's kind of weaving that together and explaining the purposes of that. So a long time ago, I was faced with a number of clients and situations where I became pretty aware that my communication was going to be the most critical piece of the interaction that I had with my clients. And so it started me on this journey of investigating and interest in communications and the therapeutic relationship. So I've been talking about this, teaching about this, writing about it for literally decades. So that's me.
That's you. Well, I think you. I mean, I've been familiar with your stuff for a long time, and I admittedly I haven't read you have a textbook out there, I believe. Yeah. Do you want to do a little plug for your textbook?
Sure. My textbook's called Talking Body, Listening Hands, and it's published by Algonquin College Press. So if people go to my website, they can find it there.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to include your website in the show notes. So
okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's I have seen the textbook, I've flipped through it, but I have not read it cover to cover.
Yeah.
But this is such an important thing that you have done and that you've made a career out of, really, because like you said communication is the most important thing. And I feel, and you know, you've been practicing for a lot longer than me. You know, I've been around since the early 2000s. And it took a long time to realize that what we say and how we interact and the language and the narratives and the communication we use, how impactful that is. But I like how you said that we learn in silos. So we learn all these different things, but there's not a lot of integration of that, like translating that knowledge between, why, like, we learn about anatomy and physiology and all these wonderful hands-on techniques, and we learn about, jurisprudence and stuff, and we learn about informed consent, and they talk about, ethics of like not doing harm and these kind of things. But
Yeah.
it's not really integrated together very well. In your career, I guess, you spent a lot of your time teaching at Algonquin College, if I could remember. Is that right?
I am now retired from my Algonquin gig, but yes, I was there for 20 years as teaching just this material.
Just material. Now, did you find, because you were so heavily involved in this, that did you find that in the curriculum and in the program there at Algonquin that there was more of a integration of this material?
Well, we didn't set out to do this, but I ended up taking on all the courses that taught communications and jurisprudence and professionalism and entrepreneurship and financial literacy. So I had all of that stream of the courses. So my students ended up having me in every term for things. So I would actually say, do you remember in term one when we talked about X? Or this is going to be dealt with in detail in term 5. So my students in that program had the advantage because I was constantly reminding them about it. But it wasn't necessarily a planned thing. It's just the way the courses landed. And I felt incredibly fortunate to have this gig because it really helped me to solidify these principles that I think are so important. Because what I was going to say at the outset, and of course I forgot, was we teach people. We don't. We work with people. We don't treat conditions.
Yes.
We treat people. And people are complicated, as any massage therapist will tell you. You bump up against their touch history, you bump up against their attitudes towards intimacy, like how closely are they comfortable having people stand next to them. So when we instruct our students, for example, in how to fulfill the requirements for informed consent, if we don't give them the bigger picture, then what they're doing is saying, I do this, and then they do this, and then I do that. I did informed consent, but there's no sense of I negotiated. I empowered my client to refuse whatever I was doing because that's important. So unless we get that, what we're doing is very risky. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that, and that's something that I wanted to talk to you about today, was about the informed consent, and we're going to come back to that because I do have some things specific to that I want to kind of unpack with you. But I think that might be I want to talk with this other stuff first before we get to that. But I love that you said that, and it's true in that. And okay, this is like, it's always dangerous to say in my experience working with in teaching and working with other RMTs, is that, yeah, the idea of informed consent, it for a lot of people, I feel that it's just more about ticking boxes of doing what you're supposed to do without the negotiating. I like that you use the word negotiating. I think if anyone's listening, that's a key word.
Yeah.
With
everything we do should be a negotiation. Everything. If touch is the modality, then everything we do should be negotiated, because people are complicated. They have complicated touch histories. And, in my own life, for example, when I was a child, my big brother used to tease me a lot by tickling me. So as a massage therapy client, I brought that ticklishness into the treatment room. And when people would touch in the areas where my brother would tickle me, I was beside myself. Well, if you add to that someone's very checkered past or layered trauma that has happened as a result of certain consequences in their life, then the touch becomes kind of it's like kryptonite for their own personal experiences. And the one thing that my experience would suggest is that schools don't fully recognize the client experience. And so on the one hand, we teach our students and we teach our massage therapists obtain informed consent or check in with a client. But if we don't have permission for what we're doing, the criminal code says we're assaulting people when we touch them without permission. That's basic information that all of our massage therapists should know. And we have a responsibility to negotiate that consent before we ever do anything.
Oh, for sure, and such a key point too that you made here, and this is brilliant the way this conversation is starting, Pam. So thanks for that. The treating the person, and so like you said, we learn these techniques, we learn like there's the stuff that we're supposed to do. But in my massage therapy education, so a long time ago, and in the engagement and the stuff I do, and I interact with other, whether they're students or whether they're RMTs, new RMTs or experienced, the story is very similar, and that we are taught to think in silos, probably because we learn in silos, right? So we think,
Yes.
oh, this person's got shoulder pain, so okay, I'm going to focus on the shoulder, and these are the techniques, and these are the assessments, and okay, this is what I found, this is what I'm going to do, and you kind of just tell the person, but you're not thinking about, well, let's not think about the shoulder pain. Let's think about this person, Pam, who's here, who's suffering with something going on in their shoulder. So flipping that script from like, we're treating Pam who has shoulder pain rather than shoulder pain in this person in front of me. And I think if we take that mentality into our clinical interactions, it changes everything.
Yes, absolutely. In the textbook, I tell a story which is based slightly on a true story, but a little bit adapted, of a person who is caregiving for her husband who has ALS, and he is losing function repeatedly to the point where the two of them are exhausted and crying and in terrible grief because the trajectory of ALS is pretty devastating. So in this story, the caregiver's husband falls asleep on her shoulder, and she feels a lot of pain, but she doesn't want to move him because he slept for the first time in days. Well, imagine she goes to see a massage therapist and she says, oh, my shoulder's kind of sore. She doesn't say any more than that. Well, if somebody immediately pokes in on the shoulder pain, oh, now we got to do range of motion, and can you do this, and it's resisted and all of that, without first determining the mechanism of injury. How did the shoulder start hurting in the first place, where the story might spill out? Well, if we don't do that, we have ignored probably the most essential part of the story. And I am a frustrated novelist. I tell people what's happening by telling stories. And this is an example of that. This is a story that I adapted from something someone shared with me. And as soon as you hear that, you go, whoa, if this person is dealing with their partner who's facing end of life circumstances in a very painful way, and I haven't asked that question, what am I doing as a massage therapist to be treating your shoulder? It's completely wrong-headed to start focusing on the shoulder in this scenario that I've given you. So that's just an example of where I feel so strongly that we treat people, we don't treat conditions. The conditions, if they get better because of what we do, that's golden, but fundamentally we're dealing with people.
Yes. And that's a fundamental message that is probably missed in large parts of our profession. People will talk about, the thing that they're treating, not the human that is there, that's suffering.
I've done it myself. I bet you've done it. I've worked with a lot of frozen shoulders. Yeah, I've said that many, many times, right? I've worked with a lot of people who experience frozen shoulder for a variety of reasons. And no two cases are the same, right? No. There's always an odd story to go with the condition.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. One of my, we're telling stories, so why not? One of the things that obviously, so disclaimer, like, yeah, when I started, right, it was very orthopedic, very musculoskeletal focused, very like, I'm going to do all the things and learn all the techniques, and I'm going to be so good
Sure.
at assessment and blah, blah, blah. And whatever, I started my career that way. And like a lot of us, we change, we learn. And one of the things that happened to me early on, though, speaking of shoulders, was I had this woman who had come in with severe shoulder pain, and it kind of presented like a frozen shoulder. And
Mhm.
she had very limited range of motion, extreme pain, couldn't sleep on it, like just it was off work. And she'd
Mhm.
seen numerous other practitioners, and she was frustrated. Like a lot of times, right? You're in
No
pain.
kidding.
And I don't really know what happened, but I just, some people you just connect with, right?
Yeah.
She's just sitting there and just having a conversation with her. And I asked her, well, what happened, to like, when did you first start to notice this problem? And nobody had asked her that before. They kind of just were like, she'd come in, shoulder, assess, you got frozen shoulder, do these
Mhm.
exercises,
Right.
you know, beat the snot out of it or needle
Right.
it or stretch it, whatever. She had all kinds of things done. And she said, oh, well, it happened a number of months ago. I left my husband, who is abusive, and he had pulled on her shoulder, as
Yeah.
she, and I didn't get a lot more details, but I was like, okay, there's a lot of trauma here. So physical trauma, but a lot of emotional, psychosocial stuff. And I said, oh, okay, well, thanks for sharing that with me. Did you want to talk more about that, or what would you feel comfortable with? And she just started telling me her story. And we had an initial visit that was she scheduled, I think it was for 45, maybe 60 minutes. And she talked for the whole time. And I said, do you want me like to do anything? Like, can I get you on the table? Like, I'm supposed to put some hands on stuff. She's like, no, this feels really good. I need to get this out of the way. And so she unloaded all of her stuff onto me. And, um, you know, I didn't scare her. I didn't, I guess, because
Yeah.
she came back.
Yeah.
But the,
Yeah.
the moral of the story is that by getting that, consistent
Yeah.
with what you said, is I held that safe space for her to tell me what was going on. And then after that, it was just a series of treatments where I felt like I wasn't doing anything. I was just kind of holding her arm and gently
Yeah.
massaging it, gently getting to some gentle range of motion. And if you watched from, in a soundproof booth, people probably would have thought, what is he doing? He's not doing anything. But it wasn't the power of the hands on. It was more about the power of the relationship and the trust, and her allowing me to do something that made that shoulder hopefully feel better. That seemed to be the
Yeah.
most impactful thing. And that was one of those things that just really switched with me. I was like, okay, so this everything I think I know is now thrown to the side. So this is one of those early moments in where I really started to shift my thinking, because I was like, this doesn't make sense compared to what I've been educated to think.
Right. There
Yeah,
you go.
yeah,
Thank you for telling me that story. I've heard that many, 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 many times. Most of my practice over the years related to working with people who had some measure of trauma in their life, whether it's personal trauma or there's complex injuries as a result of a car accident or whatever. But trauma was a real focus for how I was working with clients. And what you described is exactly my experience. Sometimes what people need to do is to get that story out of the way so they don't have to explain it anymore. And the fact that you were able to hear her and validate just simply by bearing witness to what she was telling you, you're not in any way um, engaging in psychotherapy, which sometimes the regulatory bodies get alarmed about, right? Massage therapists talking about client experience. The fact is, you're getting that stuff out of the way so that you can put your hands on someone and they won't feel like they have to say, oh, don't touch there, right? So I feel quite strongly that one of the things we do is to contain, to hold the space for our client's experience. And Christopher Moyer back in 2004 published a fascinating study about the effects of massage therapy being akin to, equivalent to psychotherapy. It was a very interesting study, and it eventually people who remember that study coming out will recognize it, but we don't talk about it very much anymore. And yet it's just as true now as it was in 2004. And I'm grateful to Chris Moyer for that work because, well, in my own case, it validated my experience as a massage therapist. And I went, yes, this is what's happening, right? Clients are not coming to see me for psychotherapy. That's not it. They want massage therapy. But there is a need to acknowledge the human experience in that hour in order for us to really see who's in front of us, who's on the table.
I'm glad you brought up that Moyer paper. I love that paper. I use it often. I talk about it often in some of the courses and things I do, because it's 2004, so we're 2023 now. So it's 20
Yeah,
years ago,
almost 20
and
years. That's right.
and it's talked about, but it seems to give us, as a profession, it kind of gives us some insight into what is it that's happening when we're treating people. When we put our hands, what's happening, right? And that paper talks about, the impacts of massage therapy are very similar to that of having a psychotherapy session in terms of, is it anxiety,
Yes,
depression, and
yes.
um,
Capacity to sleep.
yeah, and sleep, yeah, sleep capacity. That's right. And so you're like, okay, so if people, some people might hear that and think, oh, massage is useless. It doesn't do anything. And I hear that and I think that's fantastic, because we
It's
know that
amazing.
anxiety, depression, and sleep are three huge factors in a lot of pain and pain-related behaviors and disability. And if you can provide that safe space for someone to feel better, then that's really
And
powerful.
how do we heal? We heal by
Yeah,
resting. We
yeah.
heal by putting ourselves in that parasympathetic mode. And if what massage therapy is doing is facilitating better mood and improved sleep, uh, wait a minute, that's all about healing. That's what we do. But we have, as a profession, valued the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of what we do, because we can see, we can touch, we can feel the soft tissue changing under our fingers. So we're valuing the impacts with our hands, but have in some ways been conditioned not to value what we're doing with our hearts or what with our minds. And I think that's a great disservice both to the profession and also to the clients. It's terrible.
Yeah. One thing I felt for a long time is that in order to be valued or validated as a healthcare profession, massage therapy tried, I think, for a long time to identify as physios. Like,
Right.
we were kind of like
Yes.
we're kind of like physio light, like we want to be that kind of mechanical, tissue based, orthopedic based profession, but we know that we have this really powerful, impactful effects when we're giving massage and have hands on people. But I feel, and this is just totally my bias, is that by trying to hold on to this very strong kind of physio identity is actually stopping our progression from moving forward, where we can say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we know orthopedics, we know musculoskeletal pathology and condition, but we're really good at this kind of psychosocial stuff. It doesn't involve counseling. It doesn't involve like working out a
Oh,
scope, but we can make people feel better through different avenues that I would say, are probably, depending on the person, just as valuable, maybe even more valuable.
well, and the irony is, if you talk to physios, they're slightly envious of what our training is, which is so hilarious. Physios have master's degrees and they're highly, highly educated in understanding the function of the human body and how to improve it. And then, if you've been in a course with physios, they will sometimes kind of shake their heads at what comes out of the mouth of massage therapists, because the manual therapy skills that we have are exceptionally fine, but it's not the whole picture. And when we don't acknowledge the whole picture, we miss the point of what's really remarkable about what we do. It's hard to talk about it, though, don't you find? It's hard for massage therapists to acknowledge that what they did was hold the space for a client. That takes a certain degree of maturity to actually recognize and then acknowledge that that's what you're doing. It's not my hands. My hands, meh, right? It's holding the space.
Yeah. Yeah. And this comes down to the one thing that kind of always drives me a little bit crazy is all the different like modality empires out there and all these different ways of selling hands-on techniques. And you think, well, we know that there's not one modality that works better than the other. They're all have value if you're touching somebody in a way that is meaningful and safe. Then how can one be right and one be wrong? How can you have 8 or 10, maybe more, 1,200 different named modalities, and they all claim to have effects on people, and the people that practice that way, well, I get results with my clients. Well, of course, everybody does. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a profession, right? So everyone has this different identity, and it creates these silos of ways of thinking when the commonality is you're working with the human and you're just using a different way to interact with them.
You know what's really interesting, Eric? The psychologists, the American Psychological Association, acknowledged a similar kind of phenomenon among psychologists, right? So there are hundreds of different techniques or treatments or approaches for psychologists. And so the American Psychological Association, I think it was back in 2007 or 2008, published this huge textbook full of evaluating various different kinds of techniques that psychologists use. And what they concluded in the end was the technique that is used makes the practitioner comfortable. But what really is going on is the fact that the client, or in their case, the patient, felt validated, they felt heard. And this is actually called the common factors model. So the common factors of treatment in healthcare account for, I'm going to make up a statistic, but it's like somewhere in the vicinity of 80 to 90% of the progress of a client. You think about the woman you were talking about with the shoulder problem. What she really needed to do was tell her story, feel heard, and gradually, like a deer that's been in freeze mode because they feel like they're frightened, gradually her shoulder's going to thaw, if you will, so that she can move it more. And then you can deal with the physical trauma. But until somebody can pull themselves out of that frightening mindset, it's pretty hard to heal. So what the psychologists figured out was, just sitting and watching people, making eye contact, providing compassionate, attentive listening skills. This is therapeutic. And massage therapists do it. You described exactly what you were doing in your own case, right? Well, that's what I would like our profession to value a little bit more, because for my money, I think that's really essential. And that's probably where Christopher Moyer was realizing that massage therapy was like some of the other psychological treatments, where it's just like one more way for people to feel validated and heard, so that they sleep better, they feel less anxious, and they're less depressed. I don't know, I'm maybe extending that research a little bit further, but it makes sense to me that those two realities, the common factors and what he discovered, could actually link together.
Yeah. That it would be nice if we had more research, or more people doing that kind of research in our profession. And it's too bad that, as last I'm making probably an assumption here, but I think Chris Moyer, I mean, he had a lot of papers and he was really involved in this stuff, but I think probably 10 or so years ago, I think he probably just got frustrated and kind of did something else, because I have not seen him publish anything anymore. And
yeah, I think he did go in a different direction. I'm not familiar what it is.
Yeah, I mean,
but there wasn't a lot of future in his research because it wasn't necessarily super well understood, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I don't think he's going to listen to this, but if anybody listens to this and I know him, tell him to get back on the horse and, see if we can, because we do need, it would be nice to have somebody who PhD that is invested in or understanding of the
Yeah.
profession and how to do that would be great. But yeah, he definitely has brought up some great things. So, and I like what you said. I've never heard that before, the common factors model. I was familiar with the general idea that psychotherapy doesn't really matter which technique you do, or it's all about that
Quite
shared
often
space.
who the person is,
Yeah.
like who it's the connection between the therapist and the client. And in massage, we all know this, like finding a massage therapist you relate to is all about who you want to hang out with without your clothes on and be touched by. It's
Yeah.
very intimate.
It's very intimate. And it is kind of funny that our profession is that it is odd if you think about it. If you had to describe in one sentence what it is that you do for a living, you're like, I touch naked strangers. Like it sounds really bad, right? But it's something that, we should understand, the power balance and the vulnerability that people have. And I remember very clearly from my first day in massage school, our instructor, the first day said, welcome to the only profession in the world where complete strangers are going to take off their clothes and turn their back on you. And I was like, what? That kind of, at the time I was kind of shocked, but it's always stuck in my head. I thought that's actually a really powerful thing to know, because especially being a man,
Yeah. And they're going to pay you for it.
and they're going to pay you for it and pay you pretty well too, and that's one thing that's always stuck in my head being a male too, is like, okay, there's this like, you got to be like above bar in terms of like communication and consent and all the things. So there's no room for misunderstandings.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think that that's really critical, that we need to be after a while. Let me go back. When you're first in practice, you kind of remember every client up till about the third month, and then they start to blur. And then after 3 years, you actually can't remember whether you've met certain individuals before. Well, imagine after 35 years, people will meet me in the grocery store and they say, oh, hi, Pam. And they want to tell me about their story. And I'm thinking, who the hang are you? And oh, man, I have no recollection. So one of the things that as massage therapists is really essential, and it's especially important for men who are in the profession, is that we need to have our own set of values and principles that we adhere to, so that no matter who we talk to, no matter whether we recognize them or not, if they see us in the grocery store, we are behaving with a level of consistency and integrity, so that the person they trusted is still the person in Loblaws at the vegetables, right?
Right.
There's something that's really essential and important about that, because imagine that you treat somebody in your first year of practice, and then 5 years on you meet them on the street and you're having a bad day and you're swearing to yourself, and the individual comes up and says, Eric, is it you? And you think, oh God, what did I just say? Right? Or you're at a cocktail party or somebody says something and you badmouth another individual. Who we are in the treatment room, that integrity, we need to also bring it into our lives. And that's a tall order. That's a big, tall order to actually instill that value in students. But as massage therapists, that consistency is really, really important.
Yeah.
And Amanda Basquel and some of her colleagues did some work around male massage therapists. And did you happen to see the article that the title is?
No, I know him. I know of Amanda. I've spoken with her before, but I have not familiar with that paper. So
Yeah.
I'm
So part of
intrigued.
her PhD research was in professional identity. And so one of her chapters was in the experience of male massage therapists. And the conclusion that she drew and made into the title of the paper was, just don't be creepy. Right?
Yeah,
So
love it.
for male massage therapists, it becomes essential that you can both empathize with your client's experience, male, female, two-spirited, genderqueer, non-binary, whatever. If you can empathize with that client experience and you're male, and you demonstrate in your behavior that you can be trusted, that is golden. That is so healing. In my experience with clients who've had a history of trauma, quite often the final frontier for them in healing from trauma, especially if there's been any kind of sexualized or physical trauma at the hands of a male, is to go see a good male massage therapist so they can acknowledge that that was then and this is now, and this person is a good person and I can trust them and I can judge good character. Like, all of these things are complicated, and our modality is touch, so that's where it becomes really, it's the word hits the road, if you will.
Yeah.
The hand back.
Yeah. That's such a great point there. And I'm gonna have to read that paper. That sounds good. Don't be creepy. I mean, which is, that was kind of my mantra too, is just like, don't be creepy, and try and just be normal and be thoughtful and be aware and communicate and over communicate and
Yes,
don't be creepy, and hopefully nothing bad will happen. So knock wood, I'm still here.
pretty much.
So, yeah.
It requires a level of emotional intelligence, and that is not the case for every person studying massage therapy. So emotional intelligence needs to be born out of your awareness, your perspective. But yeah, that's how you don't be creepy.
This is a bit of a loaded question, so you can feel free to answer how you wish. Do you feel that, so emotional intelligence usually comes with maturity? Like, as you get older, you become more, better at being a human, hopefully, and better at being an adult and recognizing these things. Do you see it problematic that people can enter this profession at really young ages where they probably don't have that emotional maturity? I'm generalizing, but
You're generalizing, and I certainly generalized at the beginning of my teaching in a community college setting. I would have students who were 17, and I'd be like, how can you do this work? Some of them would never have had intimate sexual relations with anyone, so that I couldn't understand how they could have formulated attitudes towards other people, touching people that were complete strangers. But over time, I realized that there are individuals who are very young, hugely emotionally intelligent, and age is not the issue. It's the capacity to relate in a kind way, in a compassionate, not judgmental way to another individual, and to be able to listen. So there might be people who were socially awkward in my classes, and those folks really did struggle in massage therapy because it quite often didn't understand what the client was saying, and the client might be giving them very subtle cues, and the cues were going over their head. So that's not necessarily about age. That's more about your capacity to observe or pay attention to the cues that you're getting. So I take your question. I certainly felt that way in the beginning, but I think it's more the emotional intelligence goes across ages, and it is a much more complex kind of phenomenon.
I'm actually glad you said that, because I was saying that to try and load it just to see how you would answer. Because in my experience, and when I was I was 25 when I started massage school, but a good chunk of my classmates were 18, 19, 20, 21. And I think almost all of them, 20 through 20 plus years later, are still practicing, and they are some of the most fantastic therapists I know. So it had nothing to do with their age. But I remember at the time going to school, I remember thinking, why, like, they're so young, like, and this is what you're entering this career right now. And that was I was only 5 years older than them, but it felt at the time, right? The difference between 20 and
You're
25. I'm ancient. I felt like one of the old guys, right? And but some of the best therapists I knew were, and people I know were young,
But Eric,
but it was. Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just
I was
saying.
just going to say what makes the absolute best therapist is somebody who's been a client first and knows what they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And they also recognize what they're uncomfortable with. And when they acknowledge that in the treatment room, then they're establishing a level of safety for the client. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. That's interject whenever you want, Pam. That was a great little thing you added. No, I was gonna say, but like what you said too about the social awkwardness. And that was the thing is that the people I think that tend to struggle were the ones that people that have trouble with the social the social interaction, the social cues, where they don't feel comfortable talking to people. But yeah, age I don't think matters. There's some people in my class that are quite a bit older than me too, and I think they're still practicing. So it's age doesn't matter per se, but anyway, this little sidetrack there. One thing I wanted to ask you about too. One thing I want to talk about is obviously our focus is kind of on ethics and whatnot, but one of my main areas of interest is on evidence-based practice and kind of trying to incorporate evidence into what we do. And the more we learn about evidence, the more we realize it doesn't give us a lot of answers anyway. It kind of gives us more wrong, less wrong ideas, but nothing is for certain, particularly with what we do, right? I would say evidence-based practice is really good medicine where you're like, you have a heart attack. This is the thing we're going to do. This is the best evidence. We're helping people that hurt. There's a lot of stuff that we don't need to worry about. And that's why I think evidence is useful. But I also think it doesn't give us a lot of certainties. But there's some stuff that I wanted to talk about was, like I feel, and I want you to hear your opinion on this, is the relationship between ethical healthcare and evidence-based practice. Do you see there being a relationship between how those things function together?
100%. Absolutely, there is. When I first became a massage therapist, there were a lot of people doing colonics, where they were doing a colonic irrigation. It was a big thing back in the early 90s, right? Well, that has been debunked as a form of treatment. But at the time, there were many massage therapists who thought, oh, this must be good, so you should go do this if you had abdominal issues. And what I see in massage therapy among practitioners is if this is the case, then that's the option. It's kind of like recipe-based home care without a lot of investigation as to the evidence to support the decision making. And we will often tell people things that are completely out of our own opinion, and we'll dress it up by saying something like, well, there's research to support this idea. Oh, yeah? Have you read it? Do you actually know what that research says? Do you know what the caveat says? That, this research is only good if these are the circumstances. I think massage therapists this is going to sound pejorative. Massage therapists can be somewhat lazy in their willingness to actually investigate the effects of certain actions. And the other whole piece of this, back to what I was saying earlier, is that if we look at the social science research, if we look at qualitative research and we consider client experience, the empirical experience of long-standing practitioners, I mean, if you've performed 20,000 treatments, you have a perspective which is, there's evidential kind of perspective there. If you've only been in practice for a year and you're telling people that they should do this and that and the other thing, that's not helpful, and that's not evidence-based. It's just trying to make us feel better about ourselves, that we know something special and that we're important. That's not evidence-based practice, and it puts the clients at risk sometimes, I think. So I think there is an ethical prerogative that we need to carry out if we're massage therapists. Yes. That was a very long-winded story. I'm sorry. Yes, The answer to your question, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next.
No, that's good. I just wanted to, I mean, I made an assumption that would be your answer. And that just kind of leads into kind of what we want to talk about, kind of in the last little bit of this conversation, as you mentioned earlier about things like informed consent. And this is something that I strongly feel needs to be talked about more. And I really strongly feel that the stakeholders in our profession need to understand the implications of the way things are being done, and the way, because I feel that if we're looking at least how I understand informed consent, is it's not being met. So, and this goes to thing like, is it possible, like, is it ethical for RMTs to make a claim they can't support, which would kind of fit into that evidence-based thing, like what claims can we actually make? If we understand the evidence says you cannot permanently deform tissue with your hands and you don't need to for people to feel better, that doesn't mean what you're doing with your hands is useless, but it means the claims you're making about, oh, I'm interacting with this specific tissue, or I'm altering this specific joint, or whatever it is you might want to claim. If there's not evidence to support that, then is it ethical for you to make those claims?
I don't believe so. I'm going to make that the short answer. I
Yeah.
don't believe it is ethical. That ethics is the study of right and wrong, the principles by which we form our attitudes in our practice. So if you think about that, then the choices that you make as a professional should land you on the side of principles that support healthy practice. The client feels better. We don't hurt ourselves as massage therapists. We stay within our scopes of practice, whatever they are, however they're described. And if we do all those things, generally speaking, clients are not going to be injured, and our regulatory bodies are not going to feel overwhelmed with the number of complaints against us as professionals. Where we get in trouble is when we make claims that are not supported, or we touch people in ways that they didn't anticipate and they feel very uncomfortable and they don't want, or they feel that they were, on the far end of that spectrum, they were abused by massage therapists, or worst case scenario, there was predation. Like, there's a continuum here of care. So if you're working within your scope of practice and you're making good decisions based on what you know about what's available to you, that gives you a pretty wide scope of what you can actually perform in the treatment room. Where I get crazy, it makes me crazy, is when people use language which is super imprecise. For example, when I hear certain individuals telling me that they're tuning the liver, I want to scream, because what does that mean? In my other life, I'm a musician. What does tuning the liver mean? Applying a tuning fork to the liver? Well, people use tuning forks in some capacity in our work, but hitting the liver with a tuning fork isn't even going to create a sound, because it's going to be kind of a splat. Okay, so what's that mean? So tuning the liver is what you're doing, alleviating palpable tension in the structures that are holding the liver in place. Now I can understand what you're talking about. There's more precision in that language. And you've probably had this experience yourself, Eric. I've had people tell me, oh, my other massage therapist told me that I have this problem, or my doctor has told me I have a degenerative disc, or I have, any number of conditions. And I always want to know, so how did they find that out? How was this determined? And when you start to unpack some of the determinations of the impressions that clients have about their conditions, quite often it's because somebody has said, oh yeah, it's really common. You got a degenerative disc. Oh yeah, you've got this. Oh yeah. And it's just irresponsible, because clients are like sponges. They hear everything we say, and then they interpret what we're saying, and then they share what they think their interpretations are with somebody else. And it's like that old game telephone we used to play as kids. So what you may have said to somebody is not going to bear any relationship to how it's actually reported 3 or 4 practitioners down the line. It's really essential what we do, that we say carefully what it is we can do, what our capacities are as practitioners, and we're describing what we're doing in a very precise way. It's, yeah, that's advanced care.
Yeah. But that, I'm so glad you expanded on that, because yeah, the way I see it too is that if we don't understand the evidence, then we can speak in these very precise terms, and we can say, oh, your back is sore because you've got a right elevated innominate on and your left is, sacrum is turned this, whatever. And you can make all these big kind of like things, and you say, well, how do you know that? Well, I can see it, I can feel it. But maybe the person is always like that and they don't have pain, and maybe that's not related to pain. And we look at the research, it says those things, there's not a strong relationship between those things and pain anyway. That's just, sometimes that's how people present, and maybe it's nothing. We're all different. No one's symmetrical. But we start to make these claims to validate why the person is sore.
There you go. Yes.
And then when we make those claims to validate the sore, it makes us feel good.
Bingo.
But the way I see it is like, first off, you're kind of making something up because it's not evidential. And then you're telling the person, this is why you hurt. And then they're giving you consent to treat based on this thing, which doesn't exist. So the way I see it is like, well, that's not informed consent, because you're giving consent to something which isn't real, or isn't related.
Informed consent is about negotiating the process of whatever it is I'm going to do with you as if you're the client, right? So first of all, I have to understand what the purpose is, what the circumstances are that created the condition that the client's reporting. And then I need to observe with my eyes, and symmetry is a huge indicator for what we're looking for, right? So I'm looking for asymmetries or postural anomalies, or listening for indications of old injuries, or all of those things. That's all true. But then when I'm negotiating with somebody, how I'm actually going to put my hands on them, where I'm going to put my hands on them, how they're going to be draped, how long I think the treatment's going to be, and what I would imagine is the time it's going to take for us to do this. Well, that's the information they need to determine whether or not they want to engage with me. Because if I start touching them and they haven't given me permission, and they suddenly take offense to what I'm doing, it's possible that they could claim that I've assaulted them because I never told them what I was going to do. And under the criminal code, that is assault.
Yeah.
I once knew a former police officer, and he would come into my classes and talk to my students. And one of the most bald statements that he ever said that I've never forgotten is, if you put your hands on me and I'm the client and I haven't given you permission, you have assaulted me under the criminal code, and I can ask for you to be charged. And my students sort of went, right? Because that's goes to the heart of what we do as massage therapists. That's why what we do is both so revolutionary, healing through touch, but also potentially so devastating. Because if we touch without permission, we may be reinforcing old traumas. People may be offended, they may be hurt, they may be harmed. So we have a responsibility to make sure that that conversation, that negotiation for consent is explicit. And at the end of that conversation, there has to be the question, do I have your permission to go ahead? There has to be the statement, if at any time you feel uncomfortable with what we're doing, let's stop or pause, because I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. If those things are in place, then you're probably getting adequate informed consent from your client. But if they're not there, you're just going through the motions.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that, Pam. That's very helpful, I think. for
My
me
lecture.
and for that. No, that's okay. I can tell you're passionate about this. This is why I wanted to have you on for this, because I knew that you would have more experience and knowledge and this than most. So I appreciate that. So one thing that I want to talk, so okay, when we talk about informed consent, we also could talk about do no harm, which is kind of that's the first thing that we're always learn. And the way I've interpreted this, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong, is that do no harm oftentimes is talked about physical harm. Like I'm not going to hurt you purposely. I'm not going to do anything that's going to make you worse.
Mhm.
Could we expand that into kind of more kind of some of the psychosocial harms or the unhelpful beliefs and narratives that people have? If like by telling them stories and making things up to try and justify a treatment, and
Mhm.
maybe like you said earlier, people go, the game of telephone, they're told all these different things.
Yeah.
Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but maybe if it's not true, but the person believes it is to be true, and that impacts their behavior in a negative way.
Mhm.
Could we include that in that ethical concept of do no harm?
You just set me up, right? Because of
Yeah,
course you can.
yeah.
Of course you can. Imagine that you have a client who has a weight issue. So they're morbidly obese. Well, obesity is one of those conditions that lots of people who are not morbidly obese believe can be solved by simply restricting your calories. And that is not the case. After a certain point, when people are morbidly obese, yes, they may be eating more than other individuals, but all of our systems become so um, pulled out of whack, that is my clinical term, pulled out of whack. So you're not able to respond to food in the same way. You don't digest it. You hold it in your system. And the obesity becomes a full system challenge. So I've heard massage therapists, for example, say to people, well, if Jack would just lose a bit of weight, he'd be so much better. His knees would function better. Yeah, that's not helpful, because obesity may be a factor in the condition of people's knees, but we are also not trained in the particulars of obesity enough to be able to say, lose weight, your knees will get better. That's not the way things work. It's very complex. And I come back to my earlier point. I think sometimes we look for a very simple, if this, then that kind of response that we can share with our clients to make us feel better, to make us feel knowledgeable. That's not helpful. Our job is to listen to our clients' needs and see where our skills fit in their circumstances. And if they don't fit, we recommend somebody else. We don't hold on to them as clients. We let them go if we're not able to help. So it's complicated, but I think that there are a lot of ways you can take your question. I could lecture you at length on that one.
No, that's fine. You can lecture if you want. I know you're retired now, so no pressure to get back in front of the classroom and lecture. But I just wanted to bring that because it's just in my world of where I first got my focus in terms of advancing my education and the stuff I teach is in the chronic pain. And that's where the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. But the one things that I have learned about it is that, a lot of people, when we're looking at the qualitative literature or the lived experience, a lot of people that suffer in pain and are disabled by it, their disability, it's not their level of pain per se, but their disability, how much pain impacts their quality of life, is really influenced strongly by the messages and the narratives that were given to them by well-meaning healthcare providers who were saying things, I shouldn't say making stuff up, but they were saying things to try to help, to try and justify why a person hurts. But then the person gets treated for that thing.
Yeah.
Using said modality or intervention, and they still hurt. And then they go and see somebody else who provides a different narrative, a different story, and a different rationale for, oh, this is why you hurt, is because I found whatever, and they get treated for that, and then they don't feel better, and it creates a cycle of disability and suffering. And I would see that, I see that as extremely harmful, because you're trying to help the person, but because you might not be aware of the evidence for that condition, or you might be unaware of, yeah, we know that the evidence for like ultrasound is whether the machine's turned on or not, it doesn't matter, right? Some people might enjoy it, some people might not, and some people might feel better, but it probably has nothing to do with the machine going bing or not. It might have something to do with chemical context. So, but people get sold these ideas to try to fix them, and it seems in a lot of cases where the pain persists, that they don't that they end up suffering needlessly or longer than they should, because of the harm of the stories they're taught. And I see that, this is my opinion, I see that as a big ethical dilemma, that needs to really be addressed at, I think, a lot of levels in healthcare and in our profession. I think that needs to be a stakeholder issue, because we need to understand, we've allowed things like pseudoscience and kind of made up stuff to flourish at all levels. And I don't think it does the public any good.
I once knew somebody who lived with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and the individual had experienced multiple 5, 6, 7 car accidents, variety of different circumstances over the course of their life. And if you can imagine, combination of the trauma of the motor vehicle, so sudden impact, plus a condition of Ehlers-Danlos, would result in not only soft tissue damage, but neurological challenges as well, because they would not be able to accommodate the force. Even if they braced, their nerves were going to get stressed. So this individual ended up with, oh my goodness, half a dozen different healthcare professionals that they were seeing. And each healthcare professional had a perspective on the circumstance. And not to say that massage therapy is the thing that was the most helpful, but the approach for this client that made a difference was that we just simply stopped trying to figure out, is it T6? Is it T7? Is it C1? Where's the TMJ? It was, how are you doing today? And what can we do that will make you feel better at the end of this hour? Because there were so many factors in this individual's healing. I couldn't promise that we were going to get rid of it all, but I have seen this client for many years, and what has worked best is presence, observation, a focus on symmetry, do no harm, don't make things worse. And whatever we do at the end of the hour, I want this client to feel better. That's what we're doing. And can I tell you what hand position is the most helpful? No, because it changes every week.
Yeah.
Every time I see this person. Well, there in a nutshell is the nature of our work. We need to be open to what's possible, but at the same time recognize our contain our skills. We need to pay attention to what we're seeing without making things worse. And you can go on. It's a continuum on a variety of different levels, and it is complex what we do. So ethically, I feel the most important thing I can do for individuals is to just simply listen, pay attention to what I'm seeing, and offer something in the hour that we are together, and then determine whether that was helpful when I see them the next time. I don't try to go too much further than that, because especially when you see people with complex presentations, it's different every time. There's all kinds of things that have happened between the one day that I saw them the first time and the next time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that, Pam, so much, because really the clinical brilliance is in simplicity.
Yeah.
But
And
it's not easy. We say simple, but it's extremely complex.
if you,
But
well,
understanding it all.
teaching, when I'm teaching my courses, Eric, I have often said, like, everything you're going to learn here today is context for what you're doing within the treatment room. There's not a lot of, you all have the skills, I have the skills, we all have that stuff in place, but the context, the perspective that we bring in, that rich perspective that comes into the treatment room is what makes it different for our clients when they feel heard in a new way and recognized. To me, that's the gift of what massage therapy does, and I just love it. I think it's one of the most fabulous professions. I love the work, but it's complex interacting with people with integrity and ethically.
Oh, 100%. And the thing is too is, sometimes on these podcasts and stuff, I feel the need to challenge the status quo sometimes, or to try to do things to push our profession forward, because I feel like we're kind of dragging our feet about adopting changes in terms of how we are educated or how we think. But I love how you've brought this today, really, and just highlighting the importance of, it may not be sexy, it may not sell courses, it may not make any of us rich, and just be like, yeah, can you just hold a safe space for me? Can you listen? Can you communicate in a way that is non-threatening? Can you explore different touch and different positions and different, be curious with your person that comes to see you, and that
Yeah.
that is the clinical brilliance, that is, I feel, is not emphasized or understood or appreciated as much as it could be in our profession. And I think we do fantastic work. If anyone thinks that I'm saying otherwise, then you're not listening. But I think we have such a huge potential impact to change people's lives, and we do. But I think we could be even better if we just address some of these things that you talked about today and said, yeah, this is where we should be focusing our energy on. And you're probably gonna have better. We can't predict better outcomes, but you're probably going to be less wrong. And at the very least, you're not going to make anybody worse. And if you do,
And
that's okay.
and truthfully, without getting into a rut where you're not being mindful when you're with your client, if you're actually present moment to moment to what's happening, present in your hands, what your hands are feeling, but also what you're observing, what you're hearing them say, if they're saying anything. If you're present, then it actually shouldn't feel like a lot of work, because we all have the skills, right? We're just applying our skills in a thoughtful, mindful way. But if we forget that, we forget that we've got a human being on the table with a story, and we don't pay attention to the story, then we get into problems. Then the regulator gets involved because complaints happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's such a brilliant way to wrap things up today, Pam. So thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your experience, your stories, and your knowledge. It's highly valuable. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And if anyone wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I'll give you my website and you can post it, and the link to the textbook is on there as well.
So, perfect. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Pam, and have a good day.
It was lovely to chat with you, Eric. I really appreciated the conversation. Have a good day to yourself. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and share it on your favorite social media platform. You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Eric Purvis RMT. And please head over to my website, ericpurvis.com, to see a full listing of all my live courses, webinars, and self-directed course options. Until next time, have a great day, and thanks for listening.